Late this week, a little late, I apologize. I set up my microtopics separately this time around because the game theory lecture examples, which pinpoint just different parts of the Thinking Strategically book, I think fitted better into those shorter series of lectures, and I didn't want to tack on the microtopics to any one particular of those. So let's just poke away at some examples here, some tidbits to give you inspiration when it comes to policy making in whatever organization you've got, whatever frame of reference you've got. So again, same three topics: the team, the CEO, and what's coming next, right? So in terms of the team, I want to point to the work of a Stanford professor named Bob Sutton. Let's see, a couple of books he has. Now, Good Boss, Bad Boss is probably his more famous book. And this is a great topic, basically getting rid of the performance review. So this by Samuel Colbert. Now, he's at UCLA Anderson School of Management, and his view is that we now have evidence that the traditional review mechanisms in organizations are actually destructive and potentially fraudulent, and they allow bosses to abuse their power. And is this just one person's opinion? The answer is no. Aubrey Daniels confirms with his own studies that performance appraisals are basically ineffectual and counterproductive. And you can look at the study done he does by he's working with the Society for Human Resource Management, which has found that 9 of 10 performance reviews are actually unsuccessful. They're too painful, they don't work, they produce an extremely low percentage of top performers. But 99% of companies still perform them, so what's going on? There is a progressive 1% to point out. Software company Shopify is a good example. IGN is a big gaming powerhouse. Those companies use what we call a crowdsourced rewards mechanism. So the idea is use a peer bonus system instead of the performance review. A good example is like 3 steps, right? Employees, they get some reward tokens that are in a bundle, and each one is worth some monetary value. Then the employees award the tokens anonymously to their colleagues, recognizing them for outstanding work, and then the bonuses are allocated accordingly. That happens twice a year at IGN. It happens monthly at Shopify. So get rid of performance reviews. They don't work. You got to find something that does. Practice what we preach if we're in business, eh? Best incentives are actually non-cash, tangible, and specific. This is forming a bridge between Treat People Right and Dan Pink's work on motivation. There's lots of studies that draw into question what would be the best motivational carrot for people. Scott Jeffrey and Gordon Adamsda did research on call center employees working at financial services companies. And they found that the non-cash tangible incentives like merchandise and travel were thought about more frequently by individuals who had the array of possible awards in place. See, and as the frequency of the thinking increases, the performance increases. So that leads to basically a larger performance boost if there's a tangible, recognizable, specific incentive. Actually, much stronger impact from this than if it's just a cash incentive. Other studies are specific about the non-cash award. The Journal of the Economic Psychology professor, it was 2 professors, Schaefer and Arks. They said that if you give people a hypothetical choice between cash and non-cash incentives, the participants will choose the cash incentive. But as soon as things switch to no longer be hypothetical, that you put in place a specific non-cash reward, it turns out persons work harder for that non-cash reward. Goodyear Tire and Rubber Companies, good example of application of this. The work they're doing on this goes back to the mid-90s, and they did a very simple, very elegant plan when it came to recognizing folks. They used some behavioral economics findings. They would rank their 60 retail districts according to previous sales, divide them into 2 groups of equal performance, and then assign one group to receive a basic monetary reward. So you're selling a new line of tires, you reach a target, you got a monetary reward. And the other group, they gave a tangible incentive of equal value to a group that had the same cash value, but it was a tangible, something, a vacation, whatever. Turned out the tangible reward group increased sales by about 46% more than the monetary reward group. So the trick to this is explaining why that happens. And we think it's got to do with the ability to visualize the tangible rewards. If you imagine yourself on a Hawaiian beach, it evokes an emotional response and makes you want to work harder for that. But money often is not really accompanied by such images, and so it's much less effective in motivating employees. How about organizational change? Just a point about that. Just think of this as large-scale behavior modification, and behaviorists have proven that certain things work. Now, this is from the text by Morton Hansen. He's the co-author of Great by Choice. You can also get this out of Google Cafeteria. The Google New York office would alter sort of the workspaces people are working within. And this is interesting. They used M&Ms as a sort of a reference point to see if they could change behaviors. So what they did was they said, okay, don't let M&Ms be hanging in dispensers out in clear view. Make persons, reach into opaque bins to obtain this colorful candy. What it is they reduce the enticement factor related to the colors of the M&Ms. What they were able to do was they saw about a 9%, and it was statistically significant, a 9% drop per week in the intake of calories from M&Ms. So it was an issue of hiding something enticing. Well, here's the 3 points of note for an organizational change. Now, Great by Choice lists 10 levers, but here are 3 that were really interesting to me. First, you paint a vivid picture. So you use stories and metaphors and pictures and physical objects to paint an image in place. And then secondly, you tweak a situation. So you educate persons about healthy food, let's say, in the cafeteria. You could alter the flow of foods, and of course that's what Google did. They used a different kind of queuing system for persons, so they would grab fewer M&Ms by kind of hiding that attractive item. And you have to know when to subtract. Now this is a finding from Charles Duhigg in his book, The Power of Habit. It tells a great story about a U.S. Army major stationed in a small town in Iraq. Every so often, crowds would gather in a plaza, and by the evening, the rioting would ensue. So what would he do? He would maybe add more troops when the crowd swells. But rather, the U.S. Army major did something different. He said, next time, have all of the food stalls removed so that the crowd doesn't form in the plaza in the first place. The lesson is quite straightforward. Managers are often obsessed with what new things to add, and they forget about subtracting to cause organizational change. The next point of note, working with the leadership topic. You often have very little time to prepare your communications, but you have to do that. So here's a shortcut. This comes from Steve Sargent. He's the president and CEO of GE Australia and New Zealand. He uses a 4-point checklist. Sometimes it takes him about 30 seconds. He asks himself 4 questions. These seem obvious, but that's why they're on a checklist. They're essential. They allow him to customize a talk, depending on the situation, because every communication event has a particular strategic pull to it. Stock analysts require a certain bit of information. Internal meetings with the product development team require another kind of information. So the critical goal is to be clear about what you need to accomplish, and then tailor your message accordingly. So the 4 points are this. First, what are the messages I want to convey? Secondly, what are the actions and behaviors that I want my audience to do as a result? Then how do I want them to feel? And finally, how should I adjust my style to my audience? Let's see, work-life balance. This came up a lot in classes in undergrad, speaking with students, pondering their futures. I think of Stuart Friedman's book, Total Leadership, which is full of many examples that how to play out this issue of work-life balance in the real world. I want to focus on one thing, which is what Stuart Friedman mentions in his text. Now, he's the founding director of Wharton's leadership program. He tries to tackle this issue in a kind of fascinating way. He says you got to start with conversations. See, most of the work-life balance approaches that people take are going about it the wrong way. He says you've got to start with a conversation. You've got to have the worker who is actually getting involved in what we call stakeholder dialogues. Find the most important people in your life, both at work and outside the office. And you might be surprised to learn how much of the actual imbalance that arises in your life has come from your own misperceptions about what people expect from you. The evidence shows of 9 out of 10 occasions, what happens is that people come through this process with new insights about basically how all the pieces of their life fit together. And they see how other people actually view them and what they expect. Most business professionals probably have this problem. That is, what they believe others expect of them is actually greater than what people really expect of them. You can discover this gap when you have a good conversation. And if it's true, and really this is true, that people expect less of you than you think, you begin to be able to reallocate your time and your attention more intelligently. So that was work-life balance. Third, identifying a wave of leaders. This is a 9-box assessment tool that the 9-box grid comes from Dan McCarthy. And let's see, I think this was in a blog. I'm trying to find my reference to this. Oh boy. My bad. I didn't write down the reference, so. Well, Dan McCarthy did some blogging, so I'm trying to find my reference. Darny darn. Well, look up Dan McCarthy blogging and you'll find stuff on crappy culture. He does a lot of work on company culture. He's a former executive at Eastman Kodak and at a Paychex company. The 9-box grid is really a must-do if you're kind of trying to involve yourself in leadership development. The grid has 2 dimensions. On the horizontal dimension, you think of performance. And people basically track from low to high performance levels. And on potential, make that the vertical dimension, people have low to high levels of potential. In essence, what you do is you figure out if somebody needs development in performance or potential, really, whether they meet expectations or not in both performance and potential, or if they exceed expectations. So the easy part of this is you could say, well, suppose somebody has very, very high performance levels. They're exceeding my expectations in performance. And then you look at their potential, and suppose that you recognize that they're meeting expectations. Well, that kind of person, what you do is you say, let's act to prepare them for a future role. But suppose they're still a high-performing person, but their potential is on the weaker side. See, now the development response is to say, okay, we want to improve this person in their current role. I won't go through all 9 pieces of this puzzle from Dan McCarthy. Other than to say that Martin Coyne of Akamai Technology says this is a, quote, must do for any senior executive serious about management development, end quote. All right. Hey, went backwards. That's a little weird. Let's do this thing. 13 hours a week! Exclamation point. Here's the average. Persons are spending 13 hours a week in their email. This is from McKinsey Global Institute. And they argue that you can free up about a quarter of that time by switching to social media. A good example of this is IBM's Luis Suarez, who he migrated from email to social networks sometime in 2008. Around that time, he had been getting about 40 emails a day. And by 4 years later, he gets only 16 emails a week. Now, he was using IBM's Connections internal social network, but you can learn what he learned by just shifting to any of the possible ways to connect. Here's the 3 things he says to do. First, shift the conversation. So Suarez began replying to emails with his messages on Connections and Twitter and Google+. This way he was able to address only certain topics. If he got repeat queries, he would simply refer his asker to his publicly posted answer. So the idea is don't answer an email with an email, but respond in the social medium so you can broadcast. Secondly, try an email fast device. Intel has been experimenting with, say, no email Fridays, encouraging the engineers to solve problems face-to-face. So try to fast from emails. And then the third trick to this is you've got to give it time. There's a company called Click. It has about 200 employees in its marketing consultancy. And the staff there uses email only for external communication. Internally, everything goes through a device called Genome, a self-designed system. At first, it takes people quite a bit of time to kind of learn the system. It actually took a few months for everyone to start fully using the device. So ditching email just takes some time. What about managing innovators? Genuine innovators are pretty rare, and the larger the company, the rarer they are. Here's a book called Serial Innovators. It's by Griffin, Price, and Bojack. They believe that about 1 in 50 members of an R&D team or an engineering staff is really an innovator. If you're at a Fortune 200 company, they think it's maybe 1 in 500 persons is an innovator. So you have very few of them. You've got to learn how to properly manage them. And there's 2 considerations that they raise that I think are very interesting. This is from the book Serial Innovators. So when it comes to product development, you can't be a slave to process. That's because serial innovators, they do not work in a kind of linear fashion. Their approach is messy. It involves overlap and iteration and feedback. A serial innovator goes back and forth between different aspects of the development of a solution to an issue. They work hard at creating a market acceptance, but they adjust the product. They go back to their inventive stage. They seek validation solutions to their invention. They're moving around in a kind of messy manner, so you have to be open to that. Don't let them be slaves to process. Secondly, you give innovators access to the organizational resources, including their co-workers. Innovations are going to compete, right, with existing resources. And often enough, the innovators don't like to work with management-assigned teams. They like to be, among volunteers. They like to do their own market research. They like to spend time with customers, ask lots of why questions, consider how customers are behaving, and so on. So they've got to be unhinged from some sort of restrictive collaborations and structures. Pricing, it does not get much attention. This is the main question to ask. Does your company have a pricing strategy? You might actually answer no, and you're not alone. It gets very little attention at most companies. Right? Fewer than 5% of Fortune 500 companies have a full-time function dedicated to pricing. That's data from the Professional Pricing Society. McKinsey and Company estimates, okay, a full-time function, that's one thing, but McKinsey went and did research and said it looks like fewer than 15% actually do any systematic pricing research. That's kind of a puzzling neglect. Numerous studies confirm that pricing is very substantial and crucial for, of course, company profitability. We know even small variations in price can alter profitability, in some cases by 20 to 50%. So there's two things that you need to focus on. So you focus on price setting and price getting. So price setting is a focus on pricing on the basis of your own costs or on the prices of your competitors. Those are crucial elements to consider, but you have to remember customer demand is key. Customer value-based pricing is what we could call it. See, instead of asking the question, can we get higher prices despite intense competition, we look for what customers are really willing to pay. You ask the question a different way. How can we create additional customer value and increase customer willingness to pay despite intense competition? So you got to try to kind of assess your company's price capabilities. Warren Buffett actually says this in a Bloomberg.com article where he's talking about pricing power. He says the single most important decision in evaluating a business is its pricing power. If you've got the power to raise prices without losing business to a competitor, you have a very good business. And if you have to have a prayer session before raising a price by 10%, you've got a terrible business. That's it for now. I'll put this up in the page, and meanwhile, you guys keep working and processing your journal, and take the quiz, and of course, post in the discussion boards. Hope all of you are well, and we'll finish up game theory next week.